I am joined today by Katherine D, aka Default Friend, of general internet archaeology fame, but also of the wonderful Default blog Substack, which you should subscribe to. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
The reason I reached out to you was because I was scrolling through my Substack feed on Friday and discovered a piece that you'd written for the Wisdom of Crowds Substack, if I recall,
Yes.
called No Culture Isn't Stuck. And for those listening along, could you give us just like a little like idea of what you argue in that piece?
That familiar cultural forms may be stagnant or dying. So, like the film industry, for example, or fashion. But that doesn't mean that all culture is dead. Just that the mediums have changed and we don't realize that we're interacting with new cultural forms.
Do you think this is like in the past when there's been old cultural forms that have become less relevant and new ones have taken root? Do you think it felt then like the new ones were kind of trivial or people didn't realize what was happening?
I think people always complain about new mediums, right? They always say, like, people complained about the novel, people complained about the film industry, about photography. And so we're going through this growing pain again, and we don't realize we're going through it.
Got it. And so this is sort of like, maybe one day there used to be people were used to reading lots of things and then the radio came out or something and everybody said, oh, this thing is stupid. It's trivial. Maybe it's not even worth contemplating on the same. It's not even worth addressing cultural criticism at because it's not that kind of thing. And then
Right.
over time, we come to realize that it was an important piece of culture.
And I think what's different about now is like with the radio, you can identify like, oh, radio is a different form, but these different forms are also internet native. So we don't even recognize what they are. Like we don't recognize a social media personality, which is an example I give, as a medium at all. It's just like some cultural excess. It's like a sign like people are shallow, people are superficial, they're narcissists, what have you.
It's almost like the basis of a kids these days rant. It's like kids these days aren't reading novels. They're just following Bronze Age pervert or whatever.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So the ones you list, you point to as potentially being new mediums in the the process of being born are internet personalities and TikTok, a certain kind of TikTok thing that's sort of like vaudeville, like variety show humor in a form that really only works in that media. It's like,
Yeah, like I also think the aesthetic, like the TikTok aesthetic, or you also see it on Pinterest and earlier on Tumblr, that is itself an art form. There's a New York Times piece a long time ago that was like TikTok aesthetics are what we have in sort of subcultures, and they're taking the place of kids' personalities, but really it's a shallow thing that's driving you towards consumption. And I thought it was like a really uncharitable view of what that is. I feel like these aesthetics that go viral on TikTok, you're creating a mood and a vibe through images. And that's, in a sense, a form of storytelling. Are these forms mature? Probably not. But I think there's something percolating that we're not recognizing. And when we do recognize them, we say like, this great tragedy, like this is what people are interested in. But I think it's more exciting and more innovative than people give it credit for. And then there's better and worse examples of it, right? Not all social media personalities are interesting performances. There's a lot of trash. But that doesn't mean that the form itself is trash. I mean, there's bad novels, right? There's terrible movies since the beginning of movies. You need to give it a chance to breathe.
you can't judge, especially an emerging art form or media format, by the worst or the median or the representative example. The thing that's going to matter is what is the best. Like, what is the thing of this that actually like catches and sticks and matters?
Right. And I think some of it's also so different. It's challenging to recognize as like that something's going on at all.
It does also feel like, people who complain about this stuff wind up putting on rose-colored glasses to the past. Like, it'd be like, when I was growing up, people were so serious and like we had all these real legitimate forms of culture. I would think back to being a teenager, and like you're saying about the TikTok aesthetic or the Instagram aesthetic. Like when I was in high school, everybody sort of like tribally affiliated with their music style. Like that was the thing. And you would like dress and act and exist through a prism of like what kind of music do you listen to right now, and sort of clothing fashion was changing at a very rapid clip, and all that stuff was different than what I imagine is happening now. But I'm not going to go to bat saying it was way better.
Yeah, I think there's a real impulse to there. I mean, there's definitely negatives with social media, but I think there's an impulse to write it off as all of it's garbage. All of it has been deleterious to culture. Very broad definition there. But I think we have to see what of the internet is good, right? It's what's emerging from it.
It's very interesting. It can be hard in the moment to even realize that what we're seeing is potentially a new type of culture. Why do you think that is?
It's moving too quickly, especially with social media. We don't really have the language to describe it and to describe what's going on. We only have the old forms to compare it to. Like we're going to need some distance from it to realize it was different from what came before.
It's very interesting. And do you think it can be perilous to try to ascribe too much of a moral or aesthetic or value judgment about these things, right? It's easy to poo-poo everything that's new, but it does feel to me like one way that you could compare different media across time is sort of its staying power, or the question of, 20 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, which pieces of modern culture still matter or still have some relevance. And most of it won't, of course. Most of the things are ephemera. Do you think that in the age of social media, some of that stuff will stick? Or do you think that because these forms are so tied to the medium itself, like TikTok comedy only works on TikTok, a Twitter personality kind of only makes sense on Twitter, do you think they'll even like make sense to historians of the future?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, internet history is itself a discipline that's existed since the internet's existed. It was even a little bit like cart before the horse, right? And there's already nostalgia for older internet personalities. There are people who have passed away whose legacy persists and whose aesthetics are being built on and are still influencing people. One person that comes to mind is the bodybuilder Ziz, who passed away. And it's not like every single person in this room will know who that is, but it's like he's like this ghost of cyberspace, and he's one of many ghosts of cyberspace that has inspired newer generations, and people have built on. There's multiple examples of this, of people who are persistent and who inspired aesthetics that were then built on, and it continued. And as long as someone's documenting it, there's a memory of it.
And it's both the thing itself gets remembered, and then the things that it goes on to influence wind up kind of like, whether it kind of gets baked into the broader culture because that thing inspired the next person. Now, you go through a bunch of examples of people who are arguing the culture is stuck hypothesis. Ted Joy, who I really like, has done a bunch of like, old music is killing new music. There's a lot of hand wringing in kind of the like, all the things I love are dying and nothing is there to replace it. Everything sucks now. And you're saying there's at least a chance that our grandkids' generation one day will be learning in their internet history class about our legendary posting.
Yeah, and in some ways they already are. There's things that maybe aren't even recognized as internet history. To go back to the aesthetics example, these things didn't emerge out of nowhere. Like the coquette aesthetic, which is like, the bows and like the deer and stuff, that has like deep roots, right? Like it has deep roots in pop culture, period. But if you just like isolate the internet, that as a mood that has persisted online, as an atmosphere, vibe, whatever you want to call it, has always been online, and it has grown and evolved with different platforms. Whether or not people like these things, or they're as appealing, or have as persistent a resonance, who knows, right? But there is something. It's not that everything's disappearing. It's that we might not like what's replacing the old.
And maybe another implication of that is, if some of these new modern forms are the seeds of something big and lasting and important, we might not expect it to be obvious now. It's not inconsistent that today these things feel trivial, but we are actually witnessing the birth of something important. Those things could go together in your telling.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, think about it the way like people treat Vine. Like Vine changed a lot, or Twitter. Twitter changes the way we think. Like, a lot of people think in like aphorisms. People are much better at writing these short aphorisms than they are at writing long form pieces. And part of that is the Facebook status, the tweet, so on and so forth.
What would you say to someone who kind of makes the argument, okay, come on, like we were talking about the novel, we're talking about plays, we're talking about films. These are all these sort of like big story things that we can see why they contribute, why they might be celebrated, a long time from now. Are you really saying that, a coquette aesthetic or Bronze Age pervert internet personality or these things, can you really put those in the same plane?
I, I'll say this: not every novel changed the world. Not every theater production changed the world. So I mean, it depends. There's a lot of trash, but there's a lot of trash in everything.
Right. 90% of everything is crap.
Yeah,
And it is, I mean, in books especially, there's a lot of cases in poetry, there's a lot of cases of people that got popular after the death of the author, where it's sort of
right.
like things that are not appreciated in their own time is almost like a trope. And so we shouldn't be, it's not necessarily true that just because things are hard to appreciate now, they're not going to matter.
And something else that's sort of popping into my head as we talk is there are a lot of bloggers who have migrated to this platform, right? Who were just, even 5 years ago was just some dude with a WordPress or a Blogspot or whatever, and are now relatively influential or at least have like pretty significant audiences. Um, and they could not have existed in any other format than the blog. And one day there's going to be someone who could not have existed in any other format but a Substack, and it was right for that moment in time and that type of audience interaction. And I also think the audience and how it's received in the moment it exists is part of the work.
Yeah, you can't separate the medium from the message.
We have a McLuhan scholar in the chat, my friend Clinton.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, who's been so. Oh, be careful. He's been chiming in some interesting comments.
All right. Well, I won't pretend to know more about McLuhan than that guy for sure. Speaking of Substack becoming a new forum entirely, what are your ambitions for your Substack?
I think, I mean, like I've reached the point I wanted to reach with it. I have a very lively audience. I've made a lot of friends. I've platformed a lot of people I really like. Clinton being one example. I see someone else in the chat, Hal, who's a friend I sort of made through Substack. Yeah, it's been a great way to meet people and talk to people and learn stuff, and also see some of my friends' work.
It's awesome. I noticed you've been doing a bit of experimental sort of video stuff.
I sort of reformatted my podcast to be a little bit better produced. Caption videos.
Oh, cool.
It's been interesting. It's a little bit more focused too. So I feel like we're so used to just putting podcasts on in the background, and I kind of like sitting with the audio a little bit more intentionally.
Is that called the computer room? Is that the
Yeah.
nice? I love that.
Thank you.
Are there who are some of your favorite Substacks? Is there anybody that you're reading or anything you've come across lately that just is at the top of your mind?
Yeah, there's a lot of Substacks I really like. I've been plugging in so much, but Less Mad at Substack.com. That's my friend Clinton, who again is in the chat. I would say that's probably my favorite one. That'll be my number one recommendation. But I read so much interesting stuff, and I love all the different ways people use Substack. One thing that I'm waiting to see, but I haven't seen and maybe exists. Someone said that they're using it to write a play, but I wonder if anyone uses it to role play or do any collaborative storytelling, because I feel like that would be a really interesting way to use the platform.
How do you think that would work?
One person could set the scene or introduce their character in a post, or like each post could represent a setting. So let's say like you're role playing Harry Potter, just something easy. Like one post could be Hogwarts, and then in the comments section, different people interacting. And so like play by post. So when I say role playing, I'm always thinking of like old forum style or chat room style role plays. You could do it in chats. You could be like a ring of different Substacks that represent different types or places within the universe. There's a bunch of different ways you could do it.
That's really cool. So it's almost like if the people at Hogwarts had a Substack and they were actually there in the comments talking. Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, so each post on the Substack could be a place within the universe, or each Substack itself could be a place. And then within each post, each newsletter, there's like a different scene that's going on or a different setting that's being explored.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a off-label off-label use.
Yeah. Yeah, you get really nuts with it. You could start doing like podcast interviews in character. You could take it probably arbitrarily.
Yeah, there's that's how people would at some point, like, this was really popular in forums when people would like spin up their own forums. I don't know if you remember when people would do that, but they would be telling stories in forum posts. And then so from that point, like you see this on every social media platform. And it's like my favorite thing to watch. And it's just imaginary play.
Interesting. And at the limit, it starts to blur the lines of like what's in universe and what's not. You're sort of like, it's almost a way that things can leak out.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting because I remember I'd see it on Tumblr in like 2009 or something. And that was really weird to me because I was so used to seeing it in chat rooms and forums where it was really clear who was playing a character and who wasn't. But on Tumblr, there'd be this weird thing where like not everyone would know that you're playing a game. And so they thought that like, oh, like there's some weird like psychopathic girl at a boarding school or something. And they would like reblog it or something and be like really like, what's going on here? People are like, what's this story? And then eventually like you would get used to the form and it was just part of the ecosystem.
To what extent do you think some of the internet personalities we talked about earlier are actually like that?
Are actually just playing a character?
Yeah.
I don't know how intentional it is. I mean, I think with some people it's intentional. Like, for example, we mentioned Bronze Age Pervert a couple of times. I know he said that Bronze Age Pervert is a character that he's playing. And I don't think it's a game for him necessarily, but it is a performance piece, I think, if I'm interpreting his words correctly. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who I think are sort of consciously playing a character, but there's a lot of people who are subconsciously playing a character and they don't realize and sort of merge with themselves.
Right. And I guess that's true in real life too. I mean, you can play a character to people you meet. You can play a character to how you represent yourself professionally.
Yeah. Yeah. To some extent, it's a necessity, right?
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I think this is really cool. I like these lives. I want to start using it more myself. Yeah, I'm a big Substack evangelist. I really like the platform because there's so much you could do with it, and so much that people have done with it.
What kind of stuff do you think we should do next?
I think there's a real opportunity for fiction that I don't know if it's been taken advantage of to the full extent. Like, was it Dracula? Someone was like emailing out
Dracula Daily?
Dracula.
Because the original Dracula was a series of letters.
Yeah. So there's things like that I think that like there could be more. I mean, I don't know how you like, the Substack, the staff could encourage that, but that was really fun. I love these sort of like thinking outside the box uses of it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we talked about this in a previous podcast I did, but I do think that as the opportunity for fiction on Substack, we haven't fully realized it. Part of it is, I think these things just take time to bake, but part of it, I think, is product stuff. Like, I think being able to read things in series more easily. People complain quite justly, I think, that like right now, a lot of the fiction or literature categories are full of people who are talking about those things rather than people who are making those things, which then sort of is a loop where it's like hard to discover people who are trying to do it. I'm a big believer that fiction on Substack could be quite big.
Yeah, I think it's like really like its moment hasn't come yet, but once people get used to the idea of like serialized novels, it might help bring it back, right? Because it's part of the people aren't reading as much as an attention span thing.
Yeah.
And creating the anticipation, and you get this sort of, cult aspect of it. There's all sorts of ways I feel like it could help.
Yeah, I think that's part of because Dracula Daily was a sensation. And it
Yeah.
caused like millions of people to read the novel Dracula who probably otherwise wouldn't have read the whole thing.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This was really fun. Everyone should subscribe to Default Blog and also read the piece on Wisdom of the Crowds that culture is not stuck. I read it on Friday and I feel like it's still kind of like rearranging my mental furniture. So thank you for writing it.
Yeah. Thanks for reading it and thanks for having me.